Welcome to the lecture on computational fluid dynamic techniques for computational aeroacoustics. In the previous lectures, I discussed several aspects of the behavior of waves in numerical simulations. It's important to be aware of these effects when you apply CFD to study or predict aeroacoustic behavior. In this lecture, I will provide an overview of several other considerations to make. Dispersion and dissipation are concepts that have been treated in detail in a previous lecture. On the right, you can see the result of a von Neumann analysis, which can be used to study both of these, as you will probably remember. When you can choose a CFD tool, higher order techniques and Lattice-Boltzmann methods generally perform well in this regard. In many cases, however, it's not so easy to change the CFD technique you are working with. In that case, you can still affect dispersion and dissipation by modifying the grid size and the time step. Another important thing to consider is whether a CFD tool has certain provisions for aeroacoustics. One of these is special boundary conditions, which was also treated in a previous lecture. Non-physical boundaries, such as inflow boundaries, outflow boundaries, and boundaries where the domain is truncated to reduce the size of the simulation, should not reflect any waves. This is illustrated by the acoustic sponge in the example on the right, which you will remember from a previous lecture. There exist multiple solutions to attenuate outflowing waves at these boundaries, and nearly all larger commercial CFD codes have provisions for this. Besides special boundary conditions, aeroacoustics also requires special post-processing techniques. One of these is to enable the application of acoustic analogies, which is treated in detail in another module. With acoustic analogies, instead of propagating waves all the way to an observer through a computational grid, analytic relations are applied to propagate sound produced by noise sources processed from the CFD solution, which is illustrated on the right side of this slide. Besides acoustic analogies, it is also important to be able to plot spectral components of certain fields within specific bandwidths. Not all CFD packages have all provisions required for aeroacoustic processing. From the larger CFD packages, acoustic analogies are available in PowerFlow, ANSYS Fluent, Star CCM, OpenFOAM, and Cadence Fidelity. Since fluctuations are crucial in the production of aerodynamic sound, the simulation of turbulence is essential in computational aeroacoustics. In CFD, turbulence can be simulated with different levels of fidelity. The highest level of fidelity is the DNS, or the direct numerical simulation. With DNS, all turbulent structures, up to the smallest Kolmogorov scales, are resolved by the grid and the time step. The lowest level of fidelity is the Reynolds average Navier-Stokes, or RANS, or unsteady RANS. Hereby, only the mean or average flow is captured on the computational grid. The effect of stochastic fluctuations on the mean flow is included by a term called the Reynolds stress, which is approximated using various turbulence models. In between DNS and RANS, there is LES, which captures all the stochastic fluctuations that can be resolved on the grid and uses a turbulence model for the turbulent structures that are too small for that. There also exists hybrid approaches between LES and RANS, such as wall model LES, the very large eddy simulation, or VLES, and the delayed detached eddy simulation, or DES. Not all of these fidelity levels are applicable to aeroacoustics. For almost all realistic applications, DNS simulations simply require two fine resolutions to be considered. RANS models, on the other hand, do not capture the stochastic fluctuations, which are the source of aerodynamic sound in many applications. For this reason, RANS can only be applied in very specific cases. One of these is the tonal noise of rotors, for which only the loading of the blades is required and can be captured by unsteady rods. Also, for applications of which the behavior is very well known, techniques can be developed to extract noise sources from the Reynolds stress. This requires calibration, however, and is only applicable to simulate minor design variations. LES is also too expensive in a computational sense for many realistic applications, and therefore most aeroacoustic simulations are performed using hybrid techniques. These methods capture the eddies that are small enough to generate noises of relevant frequencies on the computational grid and apply a turbulence model for the eddies smaller than that. Another important aspect to consider in computational aeroacoustics is the computational cost. As discussed previously, the grid size and time step in the turbulent regime should be small enough to capture eddies of relevant size. When waves are propagated on the computational grid, the grid size and time step should also be small enough to limit the adverse effect of dispersion and dissipation. As a consequence, aeroacoustic simulations are generally very large, ranging from 10,000s to millions of CPU hours. The simulation of the turbofan engine on the right, for example, required approximately 100,000 CPU hours with the commercial CFD tool PowerFlow. Because of the computational cost, computational aeroacoustics is generally performed on high-performance computers. Thereby, it's important that the simulation techniques are easy to parallelize. This generally results in the application of computationally efficient methods with explicit time integration schemes. In practice, the most applied techniques are explicit finite volume schemes, such as ANSYS Fluent, and Lattice-Boltzmann methods, which are explicit by nature, such as PowerFlow. A final consideration is the generation of the computational mesh. Computational meshes can roughly be divided in two types: Cartesian grids, as illustrated in the top figure, and unstructured grids, as illustrated in the bottom figure. With Cartesian grids, except for some local refinement regions, all cells have the same shape. This results in a trivial mesh generation, but requires a special treatment of cells that are intersected by the boundaries of the fluid domain. In this case, along the airfoil. A typical Cartesian technique is the Lattice-Boltzmann method. With unstructured grids, cells can be devised that exactly match the airfoil. The mesh generation can be laborious, however. Finite volume methods are typically applied with unstructured grids. Cartesian and unstructured grids both have advantages and disadvantages. For complex geometries, or for geometry files containing artifacts or many small features, mesh generation can be computationally expensive and also labor-intensive, as this generally requires manual intervention. In such cases, Cartesian grids often provide the most efficient solution. For problems with moving boundaries, however, unstructured meshes can efficiently capture this using morphing or moving mesh approaches. In such a moving mesh approach, the moving boundary is resolved by a deformation of the grid, as you can see in the example depicting a valve on the right. With Cartesian methods, this is not possible. Efficient solutions for Cartesian methods exist for rotating objects, but with randomly moving boundaries, these methods are generally too expensive. To summarize, there are multiple aspects that need to be considered when choosing a CFD technique for computational aeroacoustics. These aspects are dispersion and dissipation, boundary condition, post-processing, turbulence, the computational cost, and meshing. In conclusion, it is fair to say that there isn't a tool that generally offers the best solution, but that the best solution is dependent on the application and the purpose of the simulation. This concludes our video. I hope you enjoyed it and see you next time.